Now, if you're a parent, you see your child go to school every single day, you see them come home with assignments, they complete those assignments, hopefully, and turn them in, and yet you might still see a student who is struggling to read fluently. They may struggle with basic math computation or any math fluency of any kind, and then when it comes to word problems, they really struggle, and their writing is always disorganized, and the sentences don't seem to connect or flow from one to the next. And you've seen this issue over and over. And then you've probably seen videos online, whether it's through social media or whether it's on YouTube, about is traditional education outdated? And they say within these videos that, for example, our education system is based upon an industrial revolution framework or method. And we have students who go together from class to class, grade to grade, and they're grouped by ages. And there's a bell and a schedule and lunch break and all that. And so you start to think, I wonder if that's true. Is the way we teach students now, is it outdated? So therefore, is it bad? Should we go to a newer, more modern method of teaching and all that? I'm sure you may have heard these arguments all the time. I heard them a lot when I was a teacher in the classroom. And because I was a teacher looking up good ideas for lesson plans or how to teach something, these videos also came up within my feed, and I would see the arguments they made. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, that makes sense. Of course, we should go to a more modern structure. Of course, this is just outdated. Ultimately, what I want to point out is this probably brings up the wrong argument about whether schools are traditional or old, or whether they're newer and more modern or innovative. The real question is, are the students actually learning what they need to be successful, independent learners? Is learning actually occurring? And so what we're going to do in this video is look at all the arguments surrounding schools, traditional versus modern, and exactly as parents you should take away from this. Hi, thanks for watching and listening, and welcome to the Lil Will Learning Company. We build structured academic systems for reading, writing, and math, and offer structured academic tutoring as well. We highly recommend starting off with our core academic skill system. It has our main math textbook, arithmetic from beginning to end. It covers everything in arithmetic, along with reading fluency and spelling for grades 1 through 8. It's a tremendous value. We highly recommend you check it out. And without further ado, let's go further into the topic of traditional schools versus modern schools and what exactly we should take away from that argument. One of the first things we should understand is just because something is old, it does not automatically mean it's ineffective. Let's look at some examples outside of education. If there is an old method for treating patients in medicine and it works consistently, so what does it matter if it's old? It's treating them effectively. Likewise, if you're someone who's trying to get in shape and there's an old training program, but the fact is that decade upon decade of athletes have used it and they're stronger, they're more athletic, they've gotten more muscle mass on them, well, then who cares if it's old? It's clearly working. And we can see that in many other fields as well. The idea that just because something is old does not automatically mean that it's ineffective. And likewise, the opposite. Just because something is newer or more modern doesn't automatically mean that it's better. So when we look at it from that perspective, what we really have to ask is just, hey, whether or not this actually helps students learn. Are they actually learning? Is their reading becoming better? Is their writing becoming better? Are they becoming better at math? And actually, what we do know, based upon tons of research and tons of examples, is that there are older instructional methods. Now, despite it being older, they have been shown to be very effective. Things like direct instruction, constant guided practice, and making sure that the students have a ton of repetition upon those skills. And when it comes to particular academic skills with reading, phonics has always been shown to be tremendously effective. For math, a ton of practice and repetition in the computational skills. And then even with writing, working on handwriting skills, working on spelling and sentence construction, those have shown, despite the fact that they're older instruction, they have always been effective. So the real question is not whether something is older or newer. The real question should be, Is this actually effective with helping them learn? Now, the other argument that we often hear is that, well, it's based upon this old factory model that was there during the Industrial Revolution. It's over 100 years old. It's outdated. So, what I want to point out with this argument is that there is truth to it. So, what they really mean by a factory model, they really are referring to the logistics of school. So, if we can just imagine for a second, the logistics of school means, well, how are we going to group the students? Are we going to group them, well, I guess based upon age? And then we'll just call those grades. So there's grade 1 through grade 6 and so on and so forth. But we need to have a schedule. So where will these students be during this hour of the day? Where will they be during this hour of the day? When is their lunch break? So all this is based upon, yes, the factory model of learning, but it really just comes down to the logistics of it. What I want to separate there is that's the logistics of running a school. It's not the same thing as instruction. It's not the same as how will we actually teach these students. So since a lot of this is really based upon the logistics of it, or basically how a school appears, the truth is that a an old looking school and how they approach teaching the logistics of a school, they can still teach very well. And likewise, a more modern looking school, more innovative looking school can still, unfortunately, teach very poorly. So it may look more innovative, it may have more technology and all of these things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that learning has improved in that format. So the real question now becomes whether or not it looks more modern, but ultimately, are the students learning the necessary foundational skills that they will need later on? So if, let's say, older looking schools or the factory model is mostly logistics, how does that compare to like instruction in a school? Because the logistics of a school is not the same as the instruction in a school. So here's an example of the logistics of a school. Like if you're admin in a school, you're worried about which students are in which classroom and what does the bell schedule look like and where should certain classes be at what time. And when we do have to transition between activities or different learning subjects and whatnot, how will those students go between the classrooms? How much time do they have? What about testing schedules later on the school year? How are we going to space out the lunches between all the grades? Because you can't have the entire school on lunch break all at the same time. So you have to kind of stagger that out. So it's a matter of who is where and at what time and who are they with, because that's a big one also. Which students are with which teachers at what time. So they have a lot to think about. But that's not the same as instruction, where instruction comes down to, well, how will we teach reading? Are we going to teach it through phonics or are we going to teach it through context clues? How will we teach writing? Are we going to work on handwriting and spelling and sentence construction? Or will we give students the choice of writing about a topic that they really, really enjoy about through a workshop model? And same with math. Are we going to teach step-by-step procedures for computation and then work on their fluency and give them more mental math? Or are we going to give the classroom one or two problems, break them up into groups, and let them explore the problems and let the groups then come back and give their conclusion? So those are differences in terms of how will we do instruction. And again, to tie back to the whole topic of video, whether or not it looks old or more modern, that's a totally different topic. Most schools I've ever seen typically still follow a school logistics model that may be called old or the factory model, because you do have to know where students are at what time, and you also got to make sure they get their lunch. I've in my personal experience, I've seen more of it on the instruction end, where when they say old versus modern schooling, they really mean what type of instruction is given. So so a real difficulty with school logistics, in it may appear like the factory model or old schooling and all of that, but with typical school logistics, a real struggle for those schools is addressing every single individual learning gap. It is really difficult, and I'm speaking on as a person who was in the classroom for 17 years. It's really difficult to tackle that issue. So, first of all, let's take an example of a classroom where A teacher is working with them on their reading, and they're working on a particular skill, and they do test them on it later. And if they have a classroom of 30 students and 24 of them get they basically perform that skill as expected or maybe even better, well, then that's 80% of the class who really got it down well. That's good. But that still means that six didn't reach that standard. Now, whether they're just a little bit behind or whether they're years behind, who knows? But the point is you have six who didn't. And here's what we do know. For students who end up having these gaps in foundational skills, if it's left unaddressed, that compounds over time. But now we go back to the logistics of teaching. If you're a teacher, you've got 80% who've got it down, but maybe even 90% who got it down. Let's say you had 27 out of 30 who reach that goal. Now, instinctively, you would say, well, we have to move on because as a teacher, there's a lot of standards you have to teach throughout the entire year. You have to pace it out correctly. And so you kind of go, yeah, no, it's time for us to move on in this topic. So now that there's those students who didn't quite reach it, those gaps are still present. And it's not that teachers don't care. It's just that they do have to move on with stuff because if you look from the opposite end, if they don't move on, then they don't go over all the topics that the students need. And then they go into the next grade even more behind and more of them behind. And so it is tough within that system that they're working with to address every single individual learning gap. And for those who can do it, they're modern miracle workers. I applaud them. I've always seen it's really difficult to actually accomplish. Now, if you're a parent and you're hearing all these arguments and you're like, well, but I've heard about these more modern schools and that they're more innovative in how they approach it. Okay, let's take a look at exactly what these modern schools actually look like. And just to clarify, I am not anti-school at all. Again, I was a teacher for 17 years. I know how hard that job is. And I can say, at least as far as my experience, teachers work really hard, administrators work really hard, and there's a lot of things that they have to deal with when running a school, running a classroom. I empathize with them all the time. But now, as a parent, here's what I mean by these modern schools. Just because it's modern does not automatically mean that it's better. In my experience, when I've seen these more modern or innovative schools, honestly, I've never heard a very clear explanation of what exactly it is that makes it more modern or more innovative. But if we look at it from the two perspectives, there's the logistics of school and then there's the instruction within a school. Most of the time, it tends to be more modern or innovative in terms of their instruction. They still have the school structure like a dismissal time, a start time, a lunch schedule. They have classrooms that are grouping students and they're with a specific teacher who either teach by age level or who teach by subject. So that is still the same. And I'm generalizing here. I know there's schools that do it slightly differently, but if I had to kind of synthesize what I saw from more modern or innovative schools, it basically just came down to the classroom sizes were just a bit smaller and they used technology just a bit more to address those individual learning gaps. Now, that's not that bad, but I don't know necessarily if I would call that modern or innovative. It's just they did a little bit more of that. And I think schools in general are trying to do a little bit more of that. But yeah, every time I heard of a modern, more innovative school, it really just came down to the classroom size was just a bit smaller. And so they were able to get a little bit more individual attention from a teacher and just a bit more technology used. That's kind of what it came down to. Again, maybe I haven't seen enough. And if you've seen differently, leave a comment. But in my experience, that's what I've personally seen. So as a parent and you're seeing traditional versus modern schools and all that, and kind of, well, what do we really mean by that? All that wording aside, all that really comes down to is, are the students actually learning? And especially learning reading, writing, and math, and learning reading, writing, and math in a way that makes them into strong, independent learners. That's really what you should be measuring. So instead of looking at the bell schedule or how much technology they use, the real question kind of Can the students read fluently? Do they have their math facts down fluently as well? Can they actually organize their essays into paragraphs that follow a theme or a tone or anything of that sort? Are they actually learning these really important academic skills at the end of the day? You should really judge their instruction by, have they mastered the content? Are they fluent in it? Is it durable? Meaning, can they apply it in many situations? So, like for in math, can they apply it with word problems, or with reading? Can they apply it across fiction and nonfiction? Basically, do they have durable mastery, not just very specific in this one context mastery? And then again, the big one that I always talk about is, are they independent? Once they've learned these core academic skills, can they read more independently and gather more information on their own? If they are fluent in math, can they do more math problems independently, and especially the harder word problems independently as well? So again, that's the goal of school, not necessarily how it looks or how it's presented, but the standard that should be measured is, are they actually learning the core academic skills that will help them later on? Now, as a parent, what should you take from this debate? Because I can kind of see from a parent's perspective where, again, back to the beginning of the video, where you send your child to school, they're doing assignments, they turn in their work, and yet you still see them struggling in reading, writing, and math. And it could be this frustration that boils up to the surface where you're saying, well, maybe the school is old fashioned. They're just not teaching in an innovative and creative way. Um, but hopefully, I've kind of shown you that it's not as simple as that, because there are older methods of instruction that have been shown to be very, very effective. When you see those things, it's important not to give out broad labels that the school is old-fashioned, the teachers don't care, the teachers are being lazy, the students being lazy and all that. That's the problem here. It's more important to ask with the instruction, like, is decoding being addressed? Is it being taught? Are they working on their fluency in both reading and in math? Are they being taught all of the computational skills? With writing, are they working on sentence construction and grammar, and then from there piecing a paragraph together in a logical, coherent fashion with a topic sentence and supporting sentences and so on and so forth? Those are more important questions to ask within a school, or basically how your child is actually learning at that school. Whether it is old-fashioned with the factory model or whether it is more modern, those are the more important questions to ask as a parent. So, is traditional education outdated? It's not really the right question. Whether the schools look more old and traditional, whether they look more modern or new, or whether the instruction is old and traditional versus more modern or more innovative, at the end of the day, is the child learning the core academic skills that they need to become independent learners? And one thing we do know as far as instruction, and this is old-fashioned or more traditional, but direct instruction with clear instruction given and exact expectations given, and they need to actually master that skill, and they need to have a ton of repetition, a lot of feedback, and then later on they need to have recall of it. They need to go over it again and be able to recall it weeks later and months later. That really should be the question or the standard given for schools. And that's why we here at the Lil Will Learning Company have designed structured academic systems for reading, writing, and math to make sure that those core academic skills, any of those components, are addressed. And that way, those learning gaps don't compound over time, because we make sure that those systems address those gaps and build it up in a systematic, logical way. Well, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe, and come check us out at the Lil Will Learning Company, where we build structured academic systems for reading, writing, and math, and we offer structured academic tutoring as well. And until next time, take care.